This is going to sound a little bit crazy, but I'm going to do it. I've decided that I'm officially starting a random debut save, despite having 3 other projects going on at the same time. Anyway, I wanted to introduce this a little bit to you. The rules are going to be like this. We're going to use a 16-team league. We're going to use the original 16 approach. So we're using the major leagues as they stood in 1952. But we've changed a couple of things around. Mostly we've changed a few stadiums around and things like that to make things maybe a little bit more interesting. While we play through this, I'm going to be commissioner, but I'm also going to play as a GM, not as an in-game manager, which means I won't have a lot of decision over game-to-game stuff. In other words, we're playing OOTP the other way, the GM way, to see what this is like. Now, the league is set in 1964. I set it that way because I wanted to have a slightly larger draft pool, because before the draft begins, I want to prune through a few players. For example, Roger Clemens popped up at age 31 or so. I took him out so that he'll come back as a rookie. We kind of want to give Hall of Fame caliber players the chance to have a full career. We're not going to do that with everybody because you do need to have a good mix of older and younger players when you start a save like this out. But at the same time, there's some players who you don't want to shortchange too much. So I started with the 1964 teams and league setup, and I pruned a bunch of teams back. I moved a couple of teams back to where they belong, 1952 style. And then I went through each team's uniform to get something that looked at least a little bit more interesting. Now, there are some people who say that you can just set the game up in one season and then change to another season in the past in the season creation wizard right before you create your season. I tried that. If you do that, the dates of birth of your players are going to be really screwed up, so I don't really recommend doing that. Besides, the year that you're starting in is just a number. I mean, we can just call it Season 1, Season 2, Season 3. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. After the experimentation that I talked about in an earlier video, I set everything up this way. We're going to have the development engine turned on, and 5-year recalc will also be turned on with the double weighting of the current year. Now, we're also turning talent change randomness up to 200, which is the max. There are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, someone recommended it in the comments and it sounded like fun. Second, this means that great players will occasionally have bad seasons, and some unknown players will occasionally have great seasons. Now, because we have 5-year recalc on, it's unlikely that someone's going to have a great career when they were a career bench warmer in real life, but there's always that possibility, which should increase the chaos in terms of squad building. Now, this offers the potential for much better storylines, which is the reason why I wanted to make this move. It's because we care a lot about the storylines that come out of this. We care a lot more about the storylines than we care necessarily about accuracy, however you want to term that. So this is much different than the other replay projects. There are a couple things that are on that will drive a lot of sort of replay purists nuts. For example, I'm keeping the scouting system on, which means it's going to be set to normal. We're not going to know everything about every player. I know, oh yeah, you can go over to Baseball Reference, you can look it up. But we've got the development engine on, and we've got high talent change randomness turned on, so it might work out, it might not. We also have the coaching system turned on, mostly because I usually have that off when I play OOTP. We also have the player morale system on, another thing that I usually turn off. Everything that it entails will be turned on. My curiosity is whether it'll make the game feel a little bit more like Football Manager. Now, teams have a 25-man roster limit with a 15-player reserve roster. There are going to be no minor leagues. I did this to try to keep this as simple as I could, and I want the players to actually play in the major leagues as much as possible, depending on what the manager thinks works the best. Now, in terms of the schedule, we're using the 1937 schedule. I chose that because the days of the week are the same as 1964. We're going to keep that going as time goes on. We're going to try to avoid schedules in real life that had 2 All-Star games. We will try to avoid schedules in real life that had no All-Star game because we want to have an All-Star game. But we want to make sure we have these older schedules with built-in double headers and with all the other things that entails. So we'll see what happens. We're using the as scheduled schedule. I made sure that I set it up right this time. And we're going to make sure that like rainouts and stuff like that will be turned on. Now, in terms of finances, this is the part that's totally different. No other game, I guess maybe Baseball Mogul has finances, but no other game really does finances as deep as OOTP, to my knowledge, including games for other sports. But we're setting everything to 1980 numbers and we're turning inflation off. Now, again, 1980 is just sort of a somewhat random place to choose. I wanted to choose this because I thought $1 million a season is probably about the max that we want. So keep that in mind when we talk later on about salaries. It's just personal preference, right? It's just sort of like choosing the year 1964. I mean, it doesn't really mean anything. But we've turned it to 1980 and we've turned inflation completely off. We've also set it up so that 50% of the gauge share will be shared with the visiting team. This includes season tickets, and there's also 50% revenue sharing. The reason why we set this up is because we want the wealth to be shared around as much as we possibly can. I also, just in case, put in a 115% soft cap on the payroll with a 100% tax if you go over that. I've also set the cash maximum up to $3 million, right? So we want that to be a little bit higher, but we want to encourage teams as much as possible to spend on free agents. What we want to see happen is we want to see revenue sort of shared out evenly, and we don't want to see teams that are going completely bankrupt. We'll check this as time goes on and sort of make sure that this works out. The idea here is that the cash needs to be spread out among all teams to try to prevent one team from getting this huge advantage, especially because of differences in things like stadiums, media markets, and stuff like that. Now, there's another approach you can take. Some people say, well, just change all the media markets to the same size markets and then set the stadium sizes to like 4,000 or something like that. I'd rather keep the stadiums and the markets the way that they actually are and just share all the wealth in the background, right? I'm interested to know what you think about that, if that's a good idea, if that's a bad idea. I did a lot of reading before making this decision, and some people do it one way, some people do it the other way. There are also people who will go through and manually change the budget before every season for every single team. I'm not doing that, right? That sounds like way too much work. So we're going to try to keep the work to a minimum, and we'll see if this works. If it works, then maybe we do more videos talking about this. If it doesn't work, then we talk about what didn't work, and we can add to the community. The combination between having a financial system that is focused on sharing things from one team to the next, along with having talent change randomness and also having the in-season development engine turned on, hopefully will make it so that even if you have like a super all-star team that you've put together, it will not necessarily be like the greatest team of all time and for all eternity forever, right? There should be some good competition, which is what we want because it's the stories we care about. Also, just in case you're interested, free agency is turned on. The reason why, I'm a purist for traditional baseball, but I'm definitely in favor of free agency. The truth is that when you play OOTP with the reserve clause on, it's just not fun, right? If you haven't tried it before, you should try it. You'll find out really quickly as you go from one season to the next that players tend to stay with the same teams, and other than fleecing another team out in a deal, there's not much you can do. The fun just gets sapped out of it pretty soon, right? Especially since usually you can trade better than the computer and you end up being the team that wins every year. Now, in terms of the era, and I say era, that's actually more a Diamond Mine term. In terms of the environment in which we're playing in, I created a spreadsheet to allow us to choose random eras, and it includes every year from 1976 to 1986, each of those years inclusive. We will move from one year to the next at random, and once we're done with the 11, we'll randomize it again, and we'll go through the list again. Now, the reason why I like this part of baseball history is because in terms of pitching, you get a good mix of complete games and relief pitching from your pitching staff. In terms of offensive styles, you have power hitting, but not too much power hitting. There is base stealing and small ball as well to complement that, which means that there are all sorts of different styles which should suit different style players. Now, we'll see what we actually get. In addition to that, this era allows for good fielding, but not great fielding, which means that it's all totally boring, right? We don't necessarily want to use dead ball era or earlier type fielding with lots and lots of errors that can make for very frustrating games. We also don't necessarily want the modern era of baseball with fielding that is 100% always accurate and always wonderful. The reason why is because we want to have a little bit of variety. Now, in terms of the players that we will use, all players in Major League Baseball history are available. So there's this setting in OOTP where you can choose the minimum and maximum year for random debut. We are just letting it all go wild. And the reason why is because we want to learn as much as we can about players we don't know about and sort of see how they interact in this massive environment. I know that this means that pitchers, especially from the 1870s and 1880s, will be a little bit overpowered. If it's a problem, we will change it behind the scenes. Now, I'm going to make some modifications to certain players who I feel are deserving of it. We're going to cover that in tomorrow's video, so look out for that one. I'm modifying the draft pool right now, like literally as we speak. I'm trying to make sure that Hall of Fame caliber players have a full career or very close to a full career. And I'm going to throw in a couple of surprises as well that hopefully will work out, but we'll see what happens. Now, as far as how I'm going to play this, I'm not taking a manager role. I'm taking a GM role, as I mentioned before. I'm going to be GM of the Washington Senators since DC's actually not too far from where I live. Now, this should be a different experience. This is going to be different from everything else I'm doing on the channel. This will be different from, as far as I'm aware, anything that's happened on YouTube before. The thing about this mode is that there's nothing quite like it in the world of baseball simulation, right? There's nothing like having the entire history of baseball come through at random and you develop the players and you do so in this type of environment. We're going to cover the trades. We're going to cover the injuries. We're going to talk a lot about crazy storylines that happen. And we're also going to provide a lot of game footage, which is the other key. There are a lot of OOTP-focused channels out there that will give you a lot of looks at spreadsheets and a lot of talking about here's how you set up this column and that column. Now, that stuff is good, and I watch it. It's helpful. But we want to go a little bit beyond that. We want to turn this into a world that actually exists and that we can actually get immersed into and we can get a feel for. So anyway, stay tuned for this. I'd be interested in knowing how you guys think, what opinion it is you guys have about this, if you have any pieces of advice. Again, the point of this and the focus is not realism or accuracy, but rather the storylines that we can bring out and maybe have a good catalyst and maybe have this be a good catalyst for continued historical research, especially into players who otherwise don't really get a lot of attention in baseball history. So there you have it. Stay tuned. Good things are coming.